Sacramento State wants to move up to the FBS, but NCAA says, I think I might have found a loophole. I think there might be a way for Sacramento State to play at the FBS level without the NCAA saying it's all right. Gotta love a loophole, baby. Now, I will preface this by, I very well could have potentially not found a loophole, but by God, I have searched, I have looked through some NCAA documents, I asked ChatGPT, and nothing I've searched for or looked at has been conclusive that this is the case. But I think most college football fans probably know that there is a limit that FBS schools can play no more than 40% of their games versus FCS schools to remain in FBS. And you can only count one game against an FCS school, or I guess one win, technically, one win against an FCS school as your record for bowl eligibility. So, for instance, whatever group of 5 school you root for, whatever Power 4 school you root for, your school is basically only allowed to play 2 games against FCS schools. And if you win both of them, you can only count one of them towards your bowl eligibility. So if you go 6-6 and you played 2 FBS schools and you won 2 games, sorry, you're not going to a bowl game unless there's not enough schools that met the requirements, etc. From what I have gathered, there's not a limit on how many FCS, or I beg your pardon, there's not a limit on how many FBS schools an FCS school can play. So if you flip it on its head, FBS can only play 2 games, conceivably, against FCS schools. But there's no limit, from what I can tell, for FCS schools, their games against FBS schools. So if Sacramento State wants to be FBS, they're going to be an independent in the FCS, which brings up kind of a whole lot of different other problems that I'm not necessarily certain they thought of. I think they thought that the NCAA was going to approve their waiver and they were going to be in the FBS, but that didn't happen. But because you're an FCS independent, and now that they're starting in 2026, there are going to be a 12-game schedule for FCS schools. You got 12 games you got to schedule throughout the college football season. That slate is wide open to you, which means you can schedule conceivably what ChatGPT, what the Google machine, what going through NCAA documents. You can schedule 12 FBS games. You can play as many bye games as you want. You can fund your whole athletic department by going to whatever Power 4 schools you want to, getting that ass beat, and taking your check and going home. You can play on the FBS level. Are you ever going to make a bowl game? No, because you're not going to be eligible to do that. Are you ever going to make the college football playoff? No, because you're not even a member of that classification. But if you want to create the perception that you are an FBS program, and you could probably schedule like you're an FBS independent instead of an FCS independent. You could probably schedule 2 games against FCS schools and then 10 games against FBS opponents. Is it going to be difficult to get FBS games or against games against FBS opponents in your stadium? Yep, it sure is. Is it completely ridiculous to think that there might be FBS schools that would come play at Sacramento State? Yeah, probably. Is this whole exercise wholly reliant on there not being somebody in the comments to say, hey, here's scheduling regulation 69423 parentheses C-12406? Yeah. I'm not saying that I'm some sort of NCAA scholar and that but I'm just here to tell you, from the research that I've done, there is a limit on how many FBS versus FCS games there can be. From what I've found, there's not one from FCS versus FBS. So if Sacramento State wanted to, they could act as if like a quasi FBS independent, the likes of UConn and Notre Dame, that They're really not. And I think that's interesting as all get out. Do I think they're going to do that? No, I don't. But I also wonder what the path to being competitive, sustainability, what that looks like as an FCS independent, because there's only two other FCS independents that are both in the Northeast. It's Merrimack, which is in the Northeast, like I said. But then also there's Sacred Heart, I think, is the only other independent in the FCS. I just had this pulled up. Yeah, it's Sacred Heart and Merrimack. So two schools who are located in the extreme Northeast, and then Sacramento State. So you have to kind of meander and figure out your own schedule from here on out. And I mentioned before, I think that there are some dominoes that will fall that could potentially lead to Sacramento State being in Conference USA. It certainly, Texas State, by the way, accepted the Pac-12. That then puts the Sun Belt on the offensive. They say, hey, we want to be in a situation where we replace Texas State and get back to 14 members. That likely means somebody from Conference USA is leaving for the Sun Belt. The Sun Belt has kind of illusions of grandeur that the East, maybe not the Sun Belt. There are fans of Sun Belt programs who are like, East Carolina's going to want to in the Sun Belt. They're not going to want in on that. So you could probably put that to bed. But there's differing reports on whether or not Louisiana Tech is the next school up for the Sun Belt. And then what does that mean for Conference USA? Tarleton State is definitely a target for Conference USA. But I don't think it's unreasonable to think that Sacramento State could find themselves in Conference USA and then don't have to worry necessarily about the waiver for the NCAA to move up to FBS. But they have the extreme want to play on the FBS level. They desire that. And I understand that like wholeheartedly, because I think we're going to get to a point where the NCAA just says like, hey, we are going to limit whether it's 140 teams in FBS. They're not going to let everybody who wants to move up and is able to pay the $5 million expansion fee. They're not going to let everybody do that because the likes of Ohio State, Notre Dame, Michigan, Penn State, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, LSU, Clemson, Florida State, Miami, Boston colleges of the world aren't going to want to say that they're on the same level playing field with the Tarleton States and the Sacramento States and the incarnate words of the world. They're going to say that they are bigger and better than that, and they don't want to be in the same group as those schools. So you're kind of fighting for like last chairs in the musical Chairs merry-go-round. And Sacramento State wants to make damn sure they get a spot on that ship before it leaves the dock. So I think it's more likely than not, at some point, Sacramento State is in the FBS. I just don't know that it's in the immediate future. But from what I found, there's really nothing stopping them from playing at the FBS level. Does it feel probably pretty strongly, pretty likely that there are rules against that? It would be conceivable, right? That if there's a rule that FBS can only place X amount of games against FCS, that would be reciprocal. I can't find that anywhere. And again, I wholly recognize that somebody could find it, post it in the comments, and I look like a dipshit. But I'm just here to tell you, from the research I've put together, I can't find it. So there is a way for Sacramento State to play at the FBS level. And maybe, I think it would be a really interesting exercise. You schedule 10 games against FBS opponents, 2 against FCS. Let's say you go 6-6. Is 6-6 with 10 FBS opponents and 2 FCS, is that enough to get you into the FCS playoffs. Potentially, probably, maybe, even. I think that's an interesting discussion, one that's likely to never happen. But in this hypothetical situation, wouldn't you kind of respect Sacramento State for being like, you found a loophole and you exploited it wholeheartedly? And the NCAA is going to close that loophole if it does exist. Like 100%. They're not going to let a situation arise where FCS schools can fill up their schedule with FBS schools and have social media and recruiting graphics and their locker rooms painted like the 136th FBS school or whatever the case may be, right? They're not going to allow that. But you would have to, I think, respect it of like, I want this so bad. I am willing to do whatever it takes. I perused through the rule book and I found a loophole. I think you'd have to be like, you know what? Tip your cap, Sacramento State. That's a badass idea. But I doubt we'll ever get there. But I do think it's a fun exercise to think about. Want to know your thoughts in the comments below. What if the NCAA has this loophole and they've never thought about it? Would you respect it? I hope you do, because I think that's cool. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. I appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, or wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content we're pumping out. You're listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.